95% of the company, the investment on the Gen AI is get zero return.
Over 90% of our employees are using AI on a day-to-day. 95% of our engineers are using AI on their code, and then resulting into 95% plus on weekly deployment velocity increase.
If they're not willing to pay for it, you're not really solving a problem that it's hair on fire for them, right? We have like 20 design partners, none of them are paying, and I'm like, okay, like they're just testing a product.
Most startups go to a clean room, build something, and then they come out and say, oh, who can I sell this to? And if you're doing it that way, you're gonna get stuck.
So I think like this is a topic that's actually the closest to heart for me as like a VC. Andler has like invested in like 350 plus companies in Southeast Asia alone. And we know very real that enterprise adoption, like stuck 70% of them don't reach production, is a very, very real problem. So I think here we're just trying to kind of crack like what other insights do we have on here, right? So cannot wait to start this. To start this off, right, what's the one word, what's like the one kind of like sentence or phrase that you hear most often when you talk about enterprise adoption? Buy versus build. And so on, right? So I kind of want to start off with like an AI first company, or Jack Zhang say a lot on the news. So I want to hear Timothy's view first from Airwallex. How does like an AI first company like Airwallex look at buy versus build when it comes to AI adoption?
Before that, I do a quick intro about myself. So I lead data, AI, and growth for Airwallex. So to summarize my objective of my role, I kind of bring the next generation technology for the company. So AI obviously one of them. I think as we talk about, like our CEO Jack actually put a lot of emphasis on not just kind of like building our AI products externally and also using AI internally. So when we first start about like thinking about how to use AI internally, it was like kind of like 1.5 years ago. Now we are in 2026. Last year was kind of like the adoption year. So I'll just share some numbers first. So over 90% of our employees are using AI on a day-to-day. 95% of our engineers are using AI on their code, and then resulting into kind of like 95% plus on weekly deployment velocity increase. But the way that I kind of look at the enterprise adoption is kind of taking a step back into what is the biggest value initially. So we actually break it down into 3 phases. Phase 1 was the experimental phases, which is 1.5 years ago. Just quick alignment with Jack to kind of understand what use cases are more relevant for the company. So back then, I think, again, just like all the other company, we just look at a P&L. Look at a P&L, sales, marketing, customer support, no-brainer. We just need to find a way to leverage AI on a day-to-day basis. So there's kind of phase 1, validating. Technology is still quite early back in the day, so we run into issue here and there. Phase 2 is kind of like how do we actually enable people to try out AI, right? Which is the adoption phase.
Right.
So, by having, horizontal toolings for each of the employee, vertically, each of the functions, how do you actually use AI on each of the function and the use case are very, very important. So that's kind of like a phase 2. We are currently in phase 3 right now because last year we have kind of reached to a certain level of adoption. And I think now, because of the technology movement so rapidly, I think like we actually see a new wave of company coming in. So kind of echoing back on a buy versus build, we are constantly buying, but then we are buying new stuff, but at the same time, we always question ourselves whether there are things that we need to build internally as well. So I think it's a kind of very dynamic kind of like, back and forth. And then I think there will be more this year as well.
I'm actually kind of keen to hear perspective from Michael, from our perspective here as well. So we have the perspective from like a private
the enterprise
company,
guy,
right? And from a company like Oracle, that's like a different scale. And you also have like a very special title, cloud evangelist. How do you guys look at maybe AI evangelist? How do we look at this buy versus build dynamic?
So I think in the enterprise, and one of my openers, I was at a dinner with some CIOs of very large banks across Asia and US, and we were talking about stuff, and we were asking one guy like, hey, what are you working on? He goes, I'm finishing off a Lotus Notes migration. So you got to, when you think enterprise, I think people have to just slow down and realize what's actually happening there, right? A lot of enterprise is still on-prem. A lot of enterprise is not using a lot of the SaaS products. So they're mostly building, right? And they have to. And I think a lot of them have to build for privacy and governance that, outside of maybe Airwallex, where you have some, they have rules that none of us deal with. So when you talk about the enterprise, I think they're building. Some of them even have to do it on their own premises, right? And they have to kind of deal with the fact that they're got older infrastructure, right? So I think they're mostly building. I think in some products, of course, you'll see them using Chat GPT and using some things at some interdepartmental level. But when it really comes to the what's running their back end, they're mostly building, right? And you even see little projects where they're building their own version of Chat that's scoped to their data, their tendency, and has no leakage because that's the rules and the governance they play in. So it's a totally different ballgame, right?
Got it. So Oracle just say they are constantly building. Robin, you're from WIZ, you're constantly selling. So I guess you want them to say we're constantly buying more. So how do you see
I tell them to buy WIZ.
Okay, so firstly, I'm doubt about the number about 70%, because I think the successful rate is overestimated. Because last year I saw that a report from MIT. They said for their investigate that 95% of the company, the investment on the Gen AI is get zero return.
Right.
So that's the question is return that how we can be survival to the 5% remain. So return to the question that you said to buy and build this question. What I saw in the last 2 years, that for the Gen AI or the ILM-based solution, all the buyer, the big company is looking for some solution can resolve their real business problem. But actually, all the builder or startup company or AI companies are providing a very narrative scenario to focus on the use case to make our technology more better. So that's the big gap here. So that means that someone need to make this gap is fulfilled to bridge that gap. So that's why that in WIZ, in the past 2 years, we didn't provide a specific LLM-based product exactly, but we are providing a solution. The solution is based on the NLP voice bot, based on the LLM enhancement solution, this kind of things. And also it involved a lot of partners together to provide the Intel solution to the companies.
Right.
That's what we have saw, yeah.
Got it.
And then I guess, Hongfei, you've seen so many startups, especially I think doing due diligence, one of the things that you guys look at is financials, who you guys are selling to. Do you feel that the trend of startups being able to successfully sell the AI solutions to enterprises, is that increasing, decreasing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? And it's closely tied together with the question about how much people are buying versus building. Right. I think the bar for building for experimentation has definitely been lowered, right? Like it's easier for digital natives to say, okay, I'm going to build everything myself. But my view is actually that that's a pretty temporal kind of point in time kind of phenomenon, because there is that sudden explosion of AI technologies that everyone who's technical can increasingly make use of. But as folks get to that adoption phase and that actual production phase, my view is in the next kind of 3 to 5 years, we see kind of, again, that reversal to specialization, right? Like if someone else can do it better for you, like why are you building it, from scratch yourself, right? Like notwithstanding, everything you said earlier about kind of the ability to ensure security, ensure kind of compliance internally. I think that's all elements that you can build on top of. But I do think over a longer term, the startups from my view as a VC who win are really the ones who kind of are able to provide that differentiated fundamental engine for folks to build on top of for their own enterprise use cases.
I think we're going to move on to the broader question, which I think is a bit of a spicier question the crowd might be interested in, right? So that actually ties up very nicely to where Hongfei is talking about. We talked about being able to specialize for startups themselves and build specific solutions. But one of the biggest issues that I think any startup faces when they sell to an enterprise, or even when just selling in general, is data, right? And there are many facets of this. I think the first facet we want to touch on is really like you mentioned specialized solutions that can be built. But I think most enterprises generally have this a bit of like a worry about data concerns, data privacies. And so they think that, well, if I'm such a big organization, I have such a large tech team, even now my tech team is also using AI to build things out. Why don't I just build out specific solutions that I need so I don't need to release my data outwards into like the startups or any of solution providers I'm using? Do you guys see that is a concern, a very strong concern that has increased or decreased over time?
I think it's a reality. And I
Right.
think you see some startups even in the region realizing they can figure this out. If you look at like Bernard Leong's startup with WIZ.AI, right?
Yep.
One of the things he does, he runs on your tenants. And it sounds kind of simple, but it's a huge hack, right? Because he's just moving to your data. And I think startups need to think that way. And I think when you have these SaaS products where you're saying, come log into my stuff, what about the egress fees? What about the ingress? So people need to think a little smarter. And I always tell startups, my rule of thumb for like a Series A or B startup on up trying to sell to the enterprise, I think you guys do this, Wiz, is you better be a marketplace provider and you better be able to drop into their contracts. And if you can't, good luck, right? Because if I'm at Microsoft or Google at AWS and I'm selling into the enterprise and Wiz or somebody wants Alana to come with me, I want it on my Microsoft bill, right?
Sure.
And that means I can drop it into my Microsoft tenants and I'm good to go. And when startups say, oh, we're not really building that, I said, well, then you don't want customers. Because that's the way the enterprise works. They want one throat to choke, right? They want to go yell at Microsoft. They want to deal with the discounting across one thing. And to get into that marketplace, you already have to be vetted. You have to have a security review, SOC compliance, all that kind of stuff. So it kind of ups your game. And I think the startups who say, well, we're not ready to do that, then you're just not ready for enterprise customers. And then you shouldn't try because you're wasting people's time, right?
Kind of interesting to see from the perspective of Airwallex. Has there been exception for a scale up?
Agree? Yeah. Disagree? You can say you disagree.
Agree or disagree? Yeah.
Feel free to say you disagree.
Maybe half agree. I think like maybe kind of taking a step back on the question about whether we want our data to be in vendors, right? I think like the way that I look at this is kind of like broken down into two spectrum. I think first is obviously compliance, regulatory, security, all this. I think that is kind of like one spectrum of it. The second spectrum is what I actually won't call it data, but more like information. What information means for us from a product development standpoint in the long run. Because, so I will touch on the first one and then the second one. The first one I think like is always before the world of AI, right? We have machine learning and all this. From a security standpoint, it's always boiled down into two layers. One is data localization and data access. I don't think the AI world actually changes. Yep. The thing that changes on that spectrum is historically we handle a lot of structured data. There's a lot of like industry practice on how we do data governance on structured data. In the world of AI, you have like PDF, you have chat history, you have a lot of stuff. So the technology that is required to do the right governance on unstructured data is actually more challenging than before. So I think that is still a problem that we still need to solve in this AI world to avoid, breaching PII information, etc., etc. That is the first spectrum. But as a fintech, I think that is kind of like our baseline, right? So for me, I don't really spend too much time about that one because we already have very robust methodology to control that. But I'm more skeptical putting data out to vendors now, mainly because of the second reason. Because if you look at the AI world, I think last year and like now we are in first month in 2026. But then if you just look at last 3 months of evolvement from a foundational model perspective, a lot of these underlying things will be quite commoditized, especially for us as an enterprise. What is really meaningful and differentiate from a mode perspective is coming back into the information. And then if we really wanted to establish the right effective information feedback mechanism, a lot of things need to be built in-house.
Yep.
So I think that is kind of like my perspective. If I have to answer the question about whether I'm giving the data outside to the vendor, for us, the security is a table stake, but then what is really I'm considering on a day-to-day, for example, CRM, right? Yep. Whether I need to connect with a new CRM, it's really coming back to the second business value point.
Any thoughts?
I think I agree. I think it's becoming a more complicated conversation, right? Because I think when we think about data governance and security and kind of sharing, we are already at a pretty different place now than we are even like 12, 24 months ago, right? Like think about ambient listening, right? And recording of calls. Like 5 years ago, it would be unthinkable in an enterprise setting for all your calls to be recorded. Now I hop onto any call and I just assume that it is, right? Like, and part of that is, I think, a change in the enterprise mindset, but part of it is also kind of, it probably calls for a maturation and evolution of kind of the guardrails that's required in particular enterprises to make sure that, you know, privacy, you know, and compliance are still upheld within the organization itself.
I'm quite agree that the governance and the compliance, that's a reality that we have to follow. And what I saw that is more and more clear for the AI part right now. So if we go back to the 18 months before, I think that even that everybody is scared about the AI to attach about their data. But right now there's more readable because we know how to control about the limitation, and we know how to follow on the work pattern. So that will be good news, and I think that that's good news. Okay, thank you.
I think one of like the thing that was like quite key and also mentioned in the first panel as well, where I think OpenAI or like AWS mentioned one of the things they're excited about in 2026 is multimodality adoption, right? And today we also have Agora, we have WIZ, and so on. I want to kind of cut on this line a bit, right? Whereby maybe starting from Robin, from your perspective, what has changed when it comes to enterprise adoption of multimodality, be it voice, be it any other kind of modality that is different than 2025, and what do you think will happen in 2026?
Yeah, I think the most thing is changing about is how we are working with the AI, because that at the beginning nobody know how to use the powerful AI. We start from the prompt engineering, and then we go to the MCP with the tools, and now everyone is talking about the coding agent with the skills. So I think that's a big change evaluation about the work pattern. That's also why that we are moving very slow, and also talking with our customer. That right now that when you are investigating on the AI solution, you need to think about, is that a fast moving or is that a long-term solution? So that's why that I think this year will be much better right now, because everyone is clear about the AI, how it is working. Right. And we are also that we have several options to choose. You can use working with AI better. So that's why that we think that this year that the voice agent will be more workable with the LLM part to replace about the human error right now. Yeah.
Got it. Mike, you kind of mentioned that you were pushing Oracle to kind of adopt WIZ.AI a bit earlier, right? Kind of I want to keen to understand this a bit.
No, it's not so much that. What I mean is when the enterprises are working with products, what I'm saying is these guys have to get close to the hyperscalers to be able to be part of the deployment of the hyperscaler. They can't be these separate products. And you see that more and more, right? Especially with the AI stuff, because people don't want to move the work.
Yes.
Right. And if they're going to start deploying like agentic frameworks and things like that, they can't have this stuff outside of their networks. They just can't. Right. And you even see that they'll have to determine what region it's running in, what the interconnect is to it. So things that startups generally don't even think about sometimes because they don't have that problem themselves. That's kind of table stakes for this enterprise stuff. Got it. You know, and I think, I don't know if people probably don't follow Cisco much anymore. It's funny, Cisco just hit a record high, by the way, right? And it's bigger than when it was the first bubble. And Cisco put out this report they do every year. People just aren't paying attention. It's called the AI Readiness Report. And one of the things I found kind of interesting from it is people don't realize that when you think about the readiness, you talked about the readiness, a lot of times even people's office infrastructure is actually not ready for AI. Because if you think about, let's say half of the employees are now running Claude, Work, or a Chat GPT agent, which is actually running on their thing talking, your network chatter, which these things are running all the time. So if suddenly say half my laptops are running an agent, the amount of network traffic, you actually have offices are saying that they now have slow internet traffic because the office network actually can't handle everybody running an agent.
Same as in my home.
Which means you would have to upgrade your office network for this to work. And some people are not even thinking about this. So I think you have all these second order problems that an enterprise has to deal with that a lot of other offices, because people go, I have remote workers, I don't have return to office, we don't even think about this. This has actually stopped some banks from deploying agentic stuff because they have to go through and upgrade their Wi-Fi networks to be able to deal with this much chatter on the network every day, right?
Why is the AI not working? Because we have bad Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like every SaaS product out there, actually. I think I'll circle back also to that point, moving more towards like enterprise AI adoption, right? And I think this also circles back a little bit to the data question I previously talked about. So when we talk about AI solutions being used by this enterprise, there are often two perspectives or myths that most of these startups face, or at least that's what I've heard. And the first one usually is that like enterprises or even larger customers, they'll be like, we want your AI to be have already been trained on either large amount of data or very specialized data that's relevant to enterprises. So kind of the same line of saying that like, yes, you're an AI solution, but are you ready to be an enterprise AI solution, right? And then you mentioned also taking into consideration a lot of these things when integrating into an enterprise system, so on and so forth. But this data question, especially I think because right now, AI is still in the early days, right? A lot of these startups don't have this access to this data. Do you guys feel that from what you've seen this is a real worry and this is a real kind of like blocker for startups, or potentially as startups that have scaled to enterprises and are selling to enterprises, right? What do you see has been like roadblocks towards that, or is that just like a myth people say because they don't really like a solution and they're like, nah?
Yeah, I think that is also I just mentioned about the work pattern, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the concept about the context is very good concept
Absolutely.
right now, because that we are avoiding that you uploaded all of the information to the private. So that's the kind of a solution that we can access the data with a very effective way in the enterprise level. So just take an example of ourselves, okay? So now I'm thinking about my team, that is R&D team, is making our solution in this way. We are surrounding an AI, and everybody is providing the contact to our AI. The contact may be some production document, maybe the coding, the program, and maybe the meeting minutes we get from the customer. And working with this AI, this will help us to do the market promotion. They will build another feature and also make an announcement about the bug fixing, this kind of things. So this kind of working style will be the next generation about how to use AI in enterprise. I didn't see that it's happening now in enterprise, but right now in our AI startup, it's already happened. Yeah.
Okay.
I think to add on, I think you mentioned whether data matters for startups. I think actually it's broken down by phases. Data eventually will be important to amplify and get the valuation that we need, because I think like that is still the mode. But realistically speaking, as a startup, like you have 2 engineers, 3 engineers, you cannot get data.
Definitely.
That is kind of like the truth. So first stage, I always, as I'm talking to a lot of like AI startup, Singapore, APAC, US, I think what differentiates from a good startup with a bad startup that I've talked to and I'm willing to kind of invest or partner with is all boils down into 2 things. One is whether they are able to have the smart talent plus moving quick to hit the product market fit. And I think the product market fit today is very different from the product market fit in the past, because AI enable us to develop a lot faster. You have vibe coding and stuff like that. So the speed of iteration is really, really important to really kind of like get a couple logos in your brand and then kind of like amplify that impact over time. So that is how I have seen some of the company in the US have been successful. And then later on, once they build out that mode, right? Mode from a portfolio standpoint, they start having the data mode and then subsequently, becoming bigger and bigger. One example I think is Harvey. I don't know whether I ever know Harvey from the legal AI space, right?
Yep.
I think they have been around for many, many years, but I feel we only recently partnered with them. And I have been talking to the company for like last 2-3 years, but I feel like they make a very big leap over the last 1 or 1.5 years, because I personally feel that because they have enough customers, so they have seen enough contract. So that's why they are actually able to solve the problem a lot better than other company in the same vertical. But then it actually doesn't happen overnight. It's kind of like there's maybe a aha moment that, all of a sudden you hit that mass, right? And then you just, but then you need to kind of power through that. And the power through that is kind of like a combination of forward deploy engineers, understanding what the problem of the customer is, finding the product market fit of each of the customer, and then amplify that speed. So that's kind of like my point of view on how the phases actually looks like.
I guess also kind of functioning just like a VC in a way, right? So kind of adding on this, right, Hongfei, I want to hear from your thoughts. Like aside from like these traits that are exhibited by like the teams selling to enterprises, what do you think like separates like the good from like the great when it comes to like teams that are able to crack enterprise adoption?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on to that point and also answer your question at the same time, right? I think in the past with product market fit, like Robin mentioned, it's okay, like how much can you sell? And then once you sell to like X number of customers, you're pretty much ingrained because like I think the competition probably is evolving a lot slower than where we are today. Now, obviously, you know, there's the questions that surround ARR of some of these fastest growing startups because are these really recurring? How quickly do they churn once the experimentation phase is over and folks move on to the next big thing, right? So to me, like the most successful enterprise startups that we've seen, either ones in our portfolio or ones that are outside our portfolio, are the ones that actually don't go broad from day one, but they go really deep with, you know, one or two customers and really get deeply ingrained with both the customer's data as well as the customer's workflows.
Right.
Because what you realize when you are able to do that with 1-2 customers within a particular industry or vertical is you can more easily expand that to a broader set of customers in that same industry without sacrificing quality and without seeing an immense amount of churn. So one of our portfolio companies that's been able to do that is one that actually just raised a Series A, $10 million Series A. It's called Hoopo. And they've partnered with a lot of the largest BFSIs in the region to basically be able to address a very clear niche using AI sales coaching. And that's been able to kind of really help them to expand in a more rigorous and consistent manner.
Got it. I think we talked quite a lot about like buy versus build or AI adoption from enterprise perspective, right? I'm actually quite keen to understand from like a startup perspective, right? Like Wiz, for example, how do you sell differently 2025 versus 2026? Is there like a new strategy in terms of like the selling behavior from like a startup itself?
Yes, there will be new strategy. We just have a new product not announced yet, but it's already try run in some key customer. Because in the before that we are all depending on our sales team to go to the customer and to say that we have already mature that use cases in your area and we do that a lot. We make the call that millions per day and we have successful criteria. But right now for the voice agent in the market, we just need to told our customer, we have the ability and you will see that you will be happy in the future for this kind of use case. Another kind of use case, you can do that. And you have a lot of imagination. So that will be totally different strategy to go to the market. To me, yeah.
Got it. Check and balance a bit, right? Michael, do you see startups selling differently in terms of like how they're approaching you guys?
Yeah, I think one area where I think is important, I'm going to space on the name here, but it's the ex-co-CEO of Salesforce. He started that agent company for customer service.
Yes.
And if you look at, I'm just spacing on the name, but what I want to say is what these guys are doing is changing the way you sell from a pricing component. And I think this is where it's going to get complicated because a lot of the world was based on seat pricing or like an enterprise license. And the enterprises are going, man, I just have all these bills and I don't have outcomes. And that's why some of these projects are dying. I don't think it's because they don't work. They're looking at the cost of it. And so what you see people doing is changing. I don't see enough of this in Southeast Asia, but you see this a lot. It's outcome-based pricing. It's workflow-based pricing. And I think that's what some of the startups are going to have to do if they want to get into the enterprise, because they're not just going to have another $25,000 monthly bill, but they don't see the success from it. So I think pricing in your GTM is going to have to become more interesting with agents and things like that, because you can't just have a flat fee, right?
I think Airwallex is working on that right now in terms of like outcome-based pricing or this.
Yeah, we have the building product.
Super.
I think everybody has to. And I think startups who kind of think they don't, they're going to miss out, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And I think also on top of that, we talked about usage-based pricing. So let's talk about the value of usage. I think we talked about readiness of a startup in terms of data, so on and so forth. We talked about the selling points. I think I had a recent conversation with a friend who's also a VC investor, and we've talked about potentially AI solutions being sold. One of the considerations was that like handling this level of enterprise data when you're already selling to a customer, right? And so the customer gives you this chunk load of data. Usually enterprises, the data that they have is very unstructured, very messy. It needs to go through a certain labeling process, a certain data cleaning process. I think that's what everybody kind of understands. The problem I think we see now is that there are big companies doing this. I think Oracle has a similar product helping out on the cloud infrastructure side of access to all this data stuff. Databricks is a super huge company focused on preparing the data for their clients, so on and so forth. Do you think that as a startup selling a specialized solution, we're using specialized data, do they need this data cleaning, data labeling ability? And if they do, is that an issue? Because technically then you'll be requiring like what, another engineering team building on top of your existing product to kind of make sure everything's enterprise data ready. What do you guys think?
I think actually the problem always exists even before the AI world.
Exactly,
Because the
right.
data hygiene and stuff is kind of coming back into, as a company, how we actually generate the data. Because I think like my experience is that if we are always going to retrospectively fix data, there's actually a lot of issues.
Yeah, definitely.
But then if you take a step back, where the data problem actually came from, there are two ways that we generate data. One is human being generate data.
Right.
The second part is our code actually help generate data as well,
Yep.
right? The way that we develop product, how we log data, actually generate the data. So the first part, obviously, historical, they are human,
Yep.
in the loop, building process to kind of guide rail how people input data. I think some CRM tool did it very well, right? You have different forms, Marketo has different forms and stuff like that to kind of guide rail people to input the right data and then retrospectively control the quality of it. In the AI world, obviously, we can use AI to help doing some of the checking, maker and checker. The second part, I think, is the engineer side. I think it's kind of coming back into how we develop process. And then I think it's more maybe a little bit philosophical, but then whether data is being treated as a first-class citizen in a company. Because a lot of problem that we face is like when a product manager roll out something, right? They may not know the importance of tracking the data. Then a lot of times we are just retrospectively like kind of like logging that back. So,
but do you feel that this solution, this particular process, is this a problem that a startup building a different product should be solving? Like it should be part of their product offering.
I think it should be part of the product offering. And again, like different domains have different
Of course,
types of
definitely.
data as well.
100%.
Like for example, marketing, right? Marketing, the problem that we need to solve for paid marketing is that you need to be able to connect with LinkedIn, Google Ads, and all this, and then they have different forms of data. There's an aggregator in the world like Funnel.io and stuff like that do a lot of these consolidation. But then in the AI world, I think that is actually very easy to accomplish, standardize and all this. So I think it should be part of the offering.
And I think startups should like stay on top of like the enterprise trends in the data space, right? Because a lot of times you talk to startups, they're thinking, oh, there's block storage, there's the database, or do you have your data? What they don't realize is the enterprises kind of move past that, right?
Yep.
And if you kind of grok that terminology, you're better in talking to people. They all have this notion of like bronze, silver, gold data layers in different products. You can build on top of Databricks. You can build on top of Snowflake. And I think there's been kind of a retro thing happening in the enterprise where they're also tired of the silos themselves. Meaning when I have Salesforce, it's stuck in Salesforce. So part of the standards that's been worked on the last year or so is this thing called Iceberg, which is a data layer that everybody can talk to that just exists on block storage. Right. Most of the products can be talked to with like an Iceberg API, or they put their data in an Iceberg format and you can go read from that. So startups should just kind of keep up on the enterprise data trends so that when, to your point, when they're talking to them, they can say, oh, I understand what you got. And I can connect to it. Okay. So it's not as difficult as it should be really if they were realizing how the enterprises operate.
Right.
Maybe also inverting a bit and look at like things from a cautionary tale perspective. Like Hong Fei, you look at like startups trying enterprise adoption, right? What are the things that they're still doing that's a bit extra in 2026? They shouldn't be doing that. They should just hand it off and so on.
That's a broad question. I think that numerous things, right? I think
broad as the iceberg, I guess.
Yeah, like I think overextending and overpromising yourself quite a bit, be it with regards to what you can deliver in terms of usability, in terms of integrations, in terms of kind of the ability to go really end to end. I think what many startups outside of the ones that are truly kind of really high quality technical talent, like top tier, like that 0.1% on in terms of either the technical side of things or the distribution side of things. Just focus on one problem that you need to solve for an enterprise and solve it to the best of your ability, right? And then find that ICP, that ideal customer profile within the enterprises that you could serve. And like I mentioned earlier, like serve that to the best and then expand to adjacencies in terms of customer base. Like that, to me, is really kind of all you need to do. Much easier said than done. But like, a lot of startups want to be a lot of things for a lot of people. I think that just doesn't work in today's day and age.
So in this case, then I think we have about slightly under 5 minutes probably on the panel. So I just want to give you guys, maybe not give you guys, I want to give the audience the chance first. What do you think is the way forward for the startups or whatever solutions they're building right now? What's the number one takeaway you can give them regarding to selling to enterprises and getting that deal on the table? Beyond what you guys have already said.
I think they should realize that if you think about designing or constructing a product that you're trying to sell for enterprise, I think you have to sit down and just find enterprises you can partner with, your ideal ICP, and grab them as a design partner and figure out how to build around them, right? And I think most startups who very carefully think in that way get closer to then know how to selling to them versus go in a room and build something and then let's go see if the enterprises want it, right? I think go work with them to build what they want. And if you can get one or two of them to be your design partner, like an initial stage, and maybe even get them to pay, you're very quickly on your way to having something that it's a lookalike. If this enterprise wants it, that guy probably wants it too. But I think what they normally do is kind of go to a clean room, build something, and then they come out and say, oh, who can I sell this to? And if you're doing it that way, you're going to get stuck, right?
Right.
Guys, this is an open invitation by Mike to grab him to land Oracle as an open design partner as a first view. Yes.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to what Mike said, which I completely agree with, is pay pilots, right? Like I think if it's a pilot program with a customer and they're not willing to pay for it, you're not really solving a problem that it's hair on fire for them, right? Like, so we see a lot of startups that's like, oh, we have like 20 design partners, none of them are paying, and I'm like, okay, like they're just testing a product.
Yeah.
And just follow the case that when you find a customer, that you need to find the language together with the customer. You need to describe your product with the business language. So find the business value when you do your customer service, like our voice bot, you do a customer service, you find your wording that is to measure your product using the resolution rate, but not the currency, not the latency, and not the human-like, this kind of things.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe I agree fully with all the things that we just mentioned. I think design partner and all this. And maybe I'll share a little bit about the decision criteria that I have, because there's so many AI startups in the world now. Ultimately, I think there are two categories. First category is you have a couple engineers, very, very new. You don't have any kind of brand, whatever. The second category is somewhat established, like Harvey, like I mentioned. There is an established portfolio and stuff like that. The second portfolio is very easy for me, right? I just ask like, oh, we are a fintech. Is there any other fintech that they service, and what type of use cases they have served, right? But then that is usually a more mature startup already. But an earlier stage startup, I think, is kind of coming back to the pay pilot kind of like concept.
Right.
For example, for us, we actually have standalone budget that we pay couple $1,000s for a couple WIZ vendors in the US, and then we just see which works, which doesn't work in different space. And then we just assume that all this money will go away, right? But then if one of them actually works, then we can actually put that back into our ecosystem. So as a scale up, right, on our size right now, we definitely would dedicate some budget on that part, but then we don't give that budget to every single company.
Yep.
Coming back into whether the founders are able to articulate the problem very well, whether we believe in the people. If we are believing in the people, then the rest is kind of like proving the value of it by paying them.
And that's time. Thank you so much, gents, for this
Round of applause for our gentlemen.
session.